Chris Langan's fake IQ score. Chris Langan is an American man who is credited by some sources with an IQ score of 195. Chris himself claims it is, quote, somewhere between 190 and 210, end quote. Other people regard this score as fraudulent, such as science communicator Dave Farina of the YouTube channel Professor Dave Explains, who has stated, quote, you'd think that if every single interview with this guy is going to center around this singular statistic, that we'd have seen some physical evidence of this test result at some point. No? Just me? Okay, continue, end quote. But YouTuber Omni claims, quote, Chris had his IQ tested and scored live on ABC News in the early 2000s. Here, have a look, end quote. Helpfully, Omni cites his sources in his video description, adding the note, quote, there are too many sources to include, but this is extensive and comprehensive enough, end quote. I read Omni's sources and I wasn't convinced by them. And the more I looked into Chris Langan, the more I became convinced that there's no credible evidence he has an IQ of 160 or higher. Omni's own sources do not support this conclusion. Chris claims he is a genius. At 7 minutes 44 in his video, Omni asserts, quote, Chris has never claimed I am a genius, end quote. This is a bold statement to make, given Chris is on public record saying he is a genius. In fact, in Dave's video, he shows an excerpt from Chris's interview with Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, in which Michael asks Chris, quote, are you a genius, end quote, and Chris responds, quote, well, you're kind of putting me on the spot, aren't you? You're forcing me to say either no, in which case, you know, it's all hype, or you're forcing me to say yes. I'll probably say yes, I am a genius by most of the criteria, the definitive criteria of genius. I think you'd have to consider me a genius. Yeah, end quote. That is indisputable evidence that Chris has claimed he is a genius, and it's in the video of Dave's which Omni is critiquing, so I don't know how Omni missed it. Maybe he didn't watch all of Dave's video. I had already watched Dave's video before I watched Omni's, so when I heard Omni stating Chris has never claimed he is a genius, I wondered how he could have drawn that conclusion after watching Dave's video. I even went back to Dave's video just to confirm that I had remembered it correctly, and having watched it again, I honestly can't understand how Omni missed the part in which Chris states explicitly, quote, I'll probably say yes, I am a genius. By most of the criteria, the definitive criteria of genius, I think you'd have to consider me a genius, end quote. ABC's 2020 show does not prove Chris's IQ score. Omni takes issue with Dave's denial of Chris's IQ scores, saying, quote, Dave has said that Chris Langan made up his IQ scores. He says that there is no evidence, zero, of him having a high IQ, and he just made it up to drum up his theory by self-promotion, end quote. In response, Omni insists, quote, the instantiation of Chris's IQ scores and his IQ claims have been made by, not Chris, but by third-party sources ever since the 80s and the 90s. As a matter of fact, Chris had his IQ tested and scored live on ABC News in the early 2000s, end quote. Contrary to what Omni says, Chris has made claims about his IQ score. In fact, we can see this in Dave's own video, which Omni is critiquing, in which Chris states plainly, quote, my IQ would be somewhere between 190 and 210, end quote. It's hard to understand how Omni missed this. Omni also says, quote, Chris had his IQ tested and scored live on ABC News in the early 2000s. Here, have a look, end quote. The ABC News report was in 1999, not the early 2000s, but that's a minor point which doesn't detract from Omni's specific claim. Omni shows the video of the ABC News report, but it does not show what he claims. For a start, Omni said that, quote, Chris had his IQ tested and scored live on ABC News, end quote. But even in the video Omni shows, there is no live testing and scoring. The clip itself is barely over a minute long, far too short to show a live IQ testing and scoring, which the clip itself said actually took 2 hours, and apart from a few frames showing Chris moving some puzzle pieces around while the reporter narrates over the video, there's nothing to show Chris's test at all. It's not even clear if those puzzle piece shots are supposed to be from the actual test. This is not a clip of Chris taking the test live, and it doesn't even claim to be. Maybe there is a recording of live footage of Chris taking the entire test, but what Omni showed certainly isn't it. Telling us to just take a look at this clip doesn't substantiate Omni's case at all. In order to be convincing, what I would like to see is an explanation of which IQ test Chris was given, who gave it, the conditions under which it was given, and the methodology used to calibrate the results. The ABC clip provided by Omni doesn't give us this. It only tells us, quote, his score reported is too high to measure, end quote, which are the words of the reporter, not the tester. And we see on screen the unidentified tester saying, quote, the highest individual that I have ever measured in 25 years of doing this, end quote. But this person doesn't even give us a number in this clip. Now, if we go to one of Omni's other sources, a transcript of the 2020 report, we do find the name of this tester, Dr. Bob Novelli. But when Novelli is quoted, he doesn't give us a figure for Chris's IQ. He just says, quote, Chris is the highest individual that I have ever measured in 25 years of doing this, end quote. In the associated article, we're told, quote, in 25 years of testing, the doctor had never seen a score so high. The results were literally off the charts. Langan's IQ could not even be measured by the test, end quote. But these are the words of McFadden, the reporter, not the tester, Bob Novelli. So what was Langan's score as tested by Novelli? We don't actually know, since we have no specific information from Novelli, the actual tester. We have a statement by Novelli that, quote, Chris is the highest individual that I have ever measured in 25 years of doing this, end quote, but no specific score. And we have a claim by McFadden that, quote, the results were literally off the charts. Langan's IQ could not even be measured by the test, end quote. Given this was a formal test, Chris should have received physical documentation of the test results, and he should really be showing photos of that report. In the transcript of the 2020 piece, McFadden comments, quote, in the past, his IQ has been measured at 195, end quote. But that clearly isn't talking about the score resulting from Novelli's test, and it's unclear when and how that score was achieved. This same score is cited in the ABC News clip used by Omni, who seems to just take it as established fact without questioning where it came from and whether it's valid. According to the CTMU Wiki, a site created to explain Chris's cognitive theoretic model of the universe, his theory of everything, the test used by the ABC 2020 show was, quote, the WAIS-3 test, end quote. This is the Vechsler Adult Intelligence Scale Edition 3, created in 1997. This test has a maximum score of 160, so it cannot possibly have measured Chris's IQ as high as 195. In fact, the carefully worded CTMU Wiki article on Chris's IQ score only states that his WAIS-3 score was, quote, consistent with IQ greater than 160, end quote. So the test used by the ABC 2020 show cannot be used as evidence for Chris's alleged IQ of 195, since its upper limit is well below that figure. At least now we know who administered Chris' IQ test for the ABC show, and we know which test was administered, even though we don't know the test conditions, or the collaboration methodology, or even Chris's actual score. Note that we do not know what Chris scored on the WAIS-3 test, but we do know it cannot possibly have been any higher than 160, the test's upper limit. And we do not even know if it really was as high as 160, since Bob Novelli, the tester, did not provide a specific figure in the news piece in which he is quoted, and apparently didn't say it was off the charts. But that's still enough for Omni to believe that this test proved Chris's IQ is well over 160. You can judge for yourself if that's sufficient evidence. We also need to consider the reliability of the WAIS-3 test itself. Remember, Chris was tested with WAIS-3 back in 1999, well over 20 years ago. In fact, the WAIS test is now in its 5th edition, so a WAIS-3 score is considerably out of date now. Although WAIS 3 was introduced in 1997, accuracy problems with the WAIS itself had been identified as early as the 80s. The 2003 paper, Scoring Reliability on the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale 3rd edition, WAIS 3, by Ryan and Schnackenberg-Ott, cites research from 1982, 1983, and 1990 supporting their own conclusion that, quote, regardless of one's experience level with the Wechsler scales, scoring errors occur frequently and detract from the accuracy of WAIS 3 IQs and indexes, end quote. The authors continue their criticism, stating that although the WAIS 3, quote, represents a significant improvement over its predecessors, the WAIS and WAIS R, end quote, nevertheless, quote, it appears that these improvements had little impact on the accuracy of scores produced by the present samples of students and practitioners, end quote. Remember, this WAIS 3 IQ test Omni cites was taken by Chris in 1999, well over 20 years ago. In order for Omni to claim Chris has any specific IQ score in the present, he needs to cite a current IQ score taken under valid conditions and verified by third parties. Citing a 25-year-old IQ test using a method which was already considered unreliable at the time and a method out of date by 2008 isn't good evidence. Do third-party sources confirm Chris's IQ? Omni claims, quote, Chris's IQ claims are evaluated and confirmed by third-party sources, end quote. Is this true? Omni asserts it is, stating, quote, there are third-party sources that conclusively confirm Chris's IQ scores or his intelligence, end quote. And, quote, we have third-party sources that are confirming his IQ, end quote. But what are these third-party sources which have evaluated and confirmed Chris's IQ? Omni presents several sources. In fact, in his video description, he not only cites his sources, he also writes, quote, there are too many sources to include, but this is extensive and comprehensive enough, end quote. Let's look at these sources in chronological order. The first is an entry in the Guinness Book of Records published in 1988. The second is an article in a 1990 edition of Omni magazine, a US sci-fi magazine. The third is a webpage dated 1st of November 1997, listing raw scores on the so-called MEGA test, a test of human intelligence, and showing the corresponding standard IQ test scores. The fourth is the ABC 2020 show from 1999. The fifth is an ABC news report on the 2020 show, published on the same day. The sixth is an article in the BBC Science Focus magazine, published on the 1st of November 2024. This seems like an impressive list of evidence. There are 6 sources here, covering a time frame from 1988 to 2024, so it certainly looks like Chris's IQ score has been taken seriously over the years and is still being taken seriously now. However, when we look at each of these sources in turn, we find none of them provide the support which Omni claims. Let's remember, Omni claims, quote, Chris's IQ scores are evaluated and confirmed by third-party sources, end quote. And, quote, there are third-party sources that conclusively confirm Chris's IQ scores or his intelligence, end quote. And, quote, we have third-party sources that are confirming his IQ, end quote. But do all of the sources Omni cites actually evaluate and confirm Chris's IQ scores? Well, as we'll see, several of them only copy what one or two of the others say, and several of them don't even mention Chris at all. First, there's the 1988 Guinness Book of Records entry. This reports on a score Chris received, but does not evaluate or confirm it. The Guinness Book of Records did not test Chris, or evaluate his IQ, or confirm that the test it reported on was accurate. All it did was report that Chris scored over 45 on the Heflin Research Group's so-called megatest in 1988. However, it doesn't actually use Chris's name. Instead, it refers to Eric Hart achieving this score. So, who is Eric Hart, and how does he have anything to do with Chris? Digging deeper, we find that Chris took the mega test more than once. On his first attempt, taken under his real name, he scored 42 out of 48. He later took the test again under the pseudonym Eric Hart. I will now quote Chris's own explanation of why he did this. Chris says that when the megatest was first announced, it was declared that anyone with a score of 42 would become part of the Mega Society, a group for high IQ individuals. Chris explains, quote, I worked on the test until I was sure I had 42 correct answers and sent in an answer sheet, end quote. It should be noted, since Chris does not tell us this, that the megatest participation conditions were rather loose. Chris was able to work on the test questions unsupervised, in his own time, without a time limit, in any location he pleased, using any resources available to him. This is nothing like the test conditions for a standard IQ test, not even the WACE 3 test Chris would take years later. Chris also says, quote, sure enough, I got a letter back stating that I'd achieved the cutoff score of 42. However, this letter regretfully informed me that the author of the test, Dr. Herflin, had suddenly decided to up the cutoff to 43, hence was reneging on the promised admission to the Mega Society, end quote. Feeling cheated, Chris decided to retake the test, explaining, quote, there was no rule against a repeat performance, end quote, adding, quote, there was no valid reason to disallow multiple attempts. I therefore took the test again, this time under a pseudonym, end quote. It was under the pseudonym Eric Hart that he achieved his score of 47 out of 48. Chris's two scores on the megatest were calibrated and correlated with standard IQ scores by social scientist David Redvalson and by the Herflin group itself. These calibrated results would indicate an IQ range from 163 to 174 for Chris, which is very high, but still nowhere near the score of 195 cited by the 2020 article, definitely not even close to the 190 to 210 range Chris claims for himself. So, of the two tests Chris has taken, there is no record of the actual WACE 3 score in 1999, though it is reported as having been estimated as at least 160, and the much earlier megatest score of 1988 only credits Chris with an IQ of 174 at best. Thus far, we can say with confidence that, according to Omni's own sources, there is no evidence for Chris having a score over 174. But how reliable is that score of 174? We've already looked at the WACE 3 test and seen that it was certainly not as reliable as Omni thinks, and seen that these days a WACE 3 IQ score isn't regarded as valid. How about the megatest? What do we know about it? And are megatest scores from 1988 taken seriously today as a reliable indicator of IQ level? Well, for a start, we should note that the Guinness Book of Records itself stopped recording the highest IQ scores in 1989, citing the impossibility of reliably comparing IQ scores at this level. That was just a year after Chris's second megatest score, taken under a pseudonym, was cited in the Guinness Book of Records, which does not inspire confidence in Chris's score. Are there any professional organizations which take the megatest seriously and regard it as reliable? We've already seen the 1988 megatest participation conditions were very generous, allowing applicants to take the test unsupervised, without a time limit, anywhere they wanted, leaving them free to consult resources such as other people and written information sources. At best, we could say this is more of a research ability test than an intelligence test. The reality is that the megatest was never taken seriously by the consensus of human intelligence psychologists and psychometricians. The 1991 publication Test Critiques commented, quote, what the test might measure may be resourcefulness, persistence, and so on, as easily as some unified notion of intelligence. If the test were given under controlled conditions, without the use of references, perhaps it might be a better and more exacting discriminator at the highest levels than it is under current laissez-faire conditions, end quote. Later, the work comments, quote, although the approach that Herflin takes is interesting, inventive, intellectually stimulating, and internally consistent, it violates many good psychometric principles by over-interpreting the weak data of a self-selected sample." End quote. I haven't seen any authoritative psychometrician or relevant organization taking the megatest or Chris's 1988 megatest score seriously. If Omni wants to cite Chris's megatest score as some indication of his current IQ, he needs to provide reasons to take this test and its score seriously. He certainly hasn't shown any third parties which have evaluated and confirmed Chris's megatest score or its relevance to an IQ level of Chris's intelligence. So that's one of Omni's sources addressed. It provides no reliable evidence for Chris's IQ at all, and even if it was totally reliable, it still wouldn't be able to provide any evidence for a score higher than 174. Now let's look at the Omni magazine citation. This article describes the megatest and provides readers with the test itself, but doesn't mention Chris at all, not even under a pseudonym. This is unsurprising since it was published before Chris even took the test. So this source absolutely does not evaluate and confirm Chris's IQ scores. Next, we have the Megatest Norms webpage by Daryl Miyaguchi, published on the 1st of November 1997. In this page, Miyaguchi correlates megatest scores with standard IQ test scores, explaining how the tests relate to each other. The page also includes a brief article by Ronald Herflin comparing the megatest to other standard intelligence tests and showing how they relate to each other. Nothing on this entire page mentions Chris Langan, not even under a pseudonym. So this source absolutely does not evaluate and confirm Chris's IQ score. At the very most, what it does tell us is that if Chris's megatest score is valid, then it is equivalent to a specific IQ score. But the IQ tests cited in this article, such as WAIS 3, are all completely out of date now and irrelevant to establishing Chris's current IQ level. Next, we have the 1999 ABC 2020 show, which arranged for Chris to take the WAIS 3 IQ test. Finally, we have a relevant source which really did test Chris and confirm his result. We don't even know what his exact score was, but the test's upper limit is 160, so it couldn't even have been more than that. We've also seen that this test is way out of date and was already considered unreliable at the time he took the test. It was taken over 20 years ago, and no IQ test that old can be used to indicate a person's current intelligence level. Then we have the ABC News report published on the same day as the 2020 show. This just reports on the 2020 show and doesn't provide any new information. It doesn't evaluate or confirm Chris's IQ score, it's just a repeat of the information in the show. Finally, we have the 2024 BBC article, but that just reports on the ABC 2020 show from 1999, so it's not an independent source. It's only repeating what that source says and assuming it's true. It does not evaluate or confirm any IQ score for Chris. So out of Omni's 6 sources, the Omni magazine article and David Miyaguchi's article don't mention Chris in any way at all. The Guinness Book of Records reports his second megatest score without assessing him or verifying his IQ. The ABC 2020 show reports on him taking an unreliable test, which is now way out of date and doesn't even give his score. The ABC News report just repeats what was in the 2020 show without verifying its results. And the BBC News report also just repeats what was in the 2020 show without verifying its results. Only 2 of these sources are independent witnesses to Chris even taking an IQ test: the Guinness Book of Records report on his megatest and the ABC News 2020 show on his WAIS 3. And neither of these sources assessed Chris's results or confirmed their accuracy. In his video, Omni challenges Dave with the words, quote, "So is ABC News lying? Are they conspiring to conjure up this image of some random guy, some random Christian philosopher as a 200 IQ genius? Is the news lying, Dave?" End quote. Adding, quote, "Chris Langan categorically has an IQ that is way, way above the average, and it is scored and reported by third-party sources, psychologists like the one you just saw on ABC News, reported by ABC News," end quote. And later, commenting sarcastically, quote, "For some reason, every single one of these news sources are lying. every single third-party source proclaiming Chris Langan to have a high IQ, end quote. But this is a false dichotomy. It's possible to deny there is any evidence for Chris's supposedly high IQ without accusing anyone of lying. The ABC News was simply reporting what they were told by the psychologist, and it's clear they believed the psychologist, but this isn't enough to prove their claim about Chris's IQ is correct. We've already seen reasons why this test shouldn't be treated as definitive, and it had nothing to do with anyone lying. Likewise, the Guinness Book of Records was just reporting on Chris's megatest results, and the fact that those results are unreliable had nothing to do with anyone lying. When news outlets report on news which turns out to be inaccurate, it doesn't necessarily mean anyone is lying. News outlets can report information in good faith which turns out to be wrong, and just because someone believes something sincerely doesn't mean it's correct. The psychologist who tested Chris doesn't have to be lying either. He might just be wrong due to the unreliability of the WAIS 3 test, which resulted in unintentional errors in the test's application. The importance of checking sources. As YouTube content has developed and certain genres have matured, a trend of listing sources has emerged among channels focusing on history, fact-checking, debunking, or in some other way making a claim to factually accurate content. I welcome this trend, and I'm happy to participate in it. However, just because someone cites sources in their video and provides a reference list so others can check those sources, doesn't mean their sources are good or that they are representing their sources accurately. Many viewers are likely sufficiently impressed by the act of sources being cited and listed that they won't take the time to check the sources for quality or see if they are being used correctly. In this case, Omni appears to have taken all of his sources from the Wikipedia article on Chris Langan. Not only are all of his sources listed there, he even used the same links which appear on the Wikipedia article. There's information in that article which casts doubt on some of these sources, especially the article's commentary on Chris using a pseudonym to take the mega test twice, and I think Omni should have revealed that information to his audience, but the larger issue is that Omni has used these sources and made strong claims about them without doing the work of fact-checking them himself. Remember, Omni claimed, quote, Chris's IQ scores are evaluated and confirmed by third-party sources, end quote. And, quote, there are third-party sources that conclusively confirm Chris's IQ scores or his intelligence, end quote. And, quote, we have third-party sources that are confirming his IQ, end quote. Omni gave us 6 sources, only 2 of which are independent reports on Chris's IQ. The others either don't mention him at all, or just repeat what these 2 say without verifying their accuracy. When a source repeats what another source says, then the second source is not independent. It's just saying what another source has already said. If one person does an experiment and makes a claim about their findings, and 100 people repeat their claim about the findings, that doesn't mean we have 101 independent sources confirming the claim's accuracy. It means we have one source for the claim and 100 people repeating the claim non-independently without necessarily checking if it's accurate or not. Those 100 people are not independent sources unless they repeat the experiment themselves and obtain evidence supporting the claim. Until then, they cannot be taken as evidence that the claim is reliable. Omni's claims aren't supported by his sources. There's no evidence either of the IQ tests Chris has taken meet current professional standards for IQ tests, or that their results were accurate. And even if this was true, their results are now at least 20 years out of date. Omni should have checked his sources before relying on them. Whenever a YouTuber cites their sources, you should check them. And that applies to my videos also.